Got it. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. Today is our training from NWEA about administering the NWEA map growth. If you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. We have with us Alex Luisi, who is going to be doing most of the presenting from NWEA. Mindy Stowe is also here from NWEA, and our contact for NWEA contract, Tara Davis. And I'm sorry, I'm Nancy Godfrey, the assessment coordinator with the DOE who oversees the NWEA contract. And Jeanette Kirk is our Office of Federal Programs Chief, and she is not with us today. So take it away, Alex.
All right, thanks, Nancy. Hey there, everyone. So yeah, as Nancy just said, today we're going to be going over our administration training. So last week we had our pre-administration training. I know there's a recording posted. If you missed that, we mostly covered things like rostering, what you want to do for preparing the system, preparing your user roles and all of that. Today we're going to dive right into actually taking the test, proctoring, a few things about operational reports. Actually, let me pull up the agenda, that'll help. So yeah, creating test sessions, proctoring, being able to view testing progress and checking your status along the way throughout the window using operational reports. We've got a couple of slides that Nancy provided from the main DOE perspective about policy, retesting, and things like that. And then we want to once again make sure everyone knows how to reach out to our help desk if you have any questions and give our main help number. I do also want to mention, feel free to post any questions in the chat as we're going along today. We usually use that Q&A button, but in this case, in today's webinar, it looks like there's that chat button you can use to post questions or comments. So I know Mindy and Tara will be in there looking at the questions and trying to answer. And then I'll also have some moments where I can open it up to questions and read the answers out loud. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about map growth here in Maine. So this is kind of a recap from last time, but just want to make sure everyone understands which grades and subjects are required as part of the program. So there are going to be 3 tests: reading, which is also known as ELA, English Language Arts, then math and language usage. And the students taking these tests are going to be grades 3 through 8, and then grades 10 and 11, although grade 10 is optional. The testing window is coming up here next month, starting on May 2nd through June 10th. So all tests as part of the spring assessment need to be taken within these dates. As far as which tests are required, we wanted to give you this listing here. This is the actual name of the test that you'll see in the system. So we're going to be talking a lot about proctoring today, about assigning the tests to students. These are the actual test names that you'll see when you go in and make those assignments. So we have communicated this in a few different places, but you can always refer back to the slide to just double check. And also, we also want to mention that there are accessible versions of the tests available upon request. So if you have students who use things like screen readers or refreshable Braille keyboards and need a version of the test that's compatible with those, just reach out to our partner support, our help desk line, and we can make those available for your district. By default, they're switched off just so that they're not chosen by mistake because it is a slightly different form. All right, moving on, we do just want to briefly cover scheduling guidance again. Hopefully, as we're getting closer, everyone's got their schedules finalized or got some plans for them, but we just want to give everyone a chance to understand how long the test will take. So in general, regardless of subject, map growth tests usually do take around 60 minutes. Just a reminder that these are not timed tests. Students can take as long as they need to complete the test. They can also be paused for breaks, and they can also have the test suspended to be resumed at a later day. And then just in general, we don't recommend having students take more than one test in one day. We don't want students to feel fatigued. If they're testing all day, they may not be giving their best effort on those subsequent tests. So please plan those and schedule those out. And then here along the left, you can see the approximate number of questions for each test. All right, so moving on, we're going to start getting into the bulk of today's presentation. So creating test sessions and getting the system set up so students can log in and start taking tests. So essentially, students do have to be in a test session in order to take the test. The test session is going to provide the session name and the password that all students use to log into that session and take their test. So the proctors who are running the session are the ones who can assign which tests the students are taking and also assigning any needed accommodations. There's a shortcut in there which I'll show you. So if your proctor is also a teacher who has classes rostered to them, they can use that Test My Class button to quickly create a session with all the students in their class. That can be really handy to do on the spot. And then also proctors that have the district proctor role can create test sessions for others throughout their district. So we know some districts may want to have just a few people go in and create the test sessions for everyone else to use. As long as they have that district proctor role, they can set that up ahead of time. That can be helpful for assigning those accommodations and making sure everything is applied properly. And we'll go over that process as well. So first of all, we want to talk about Test My Class. That tends to be really well liked and a really handy feature that teachers use to just get all of their students added to the session. So essentially, when you go to Manage Test Sessions here along the left and click that, you're going to have two buttons. If you have classes assigned to you in the Map Growth system, then that Test My Class button is going to be clickable. If you're a proctor and you don't have any classes assigned, it's going to be grayed out, so you can manually create a session if you need to. But please keep in mind, this will start the session immediately. You will still need to go in and assign any tests or any accommodations. But then the session can be saved for later use, or you can delete the session when you're done. And I'll repeat this a few times, but with your test session, whenever you delete the session, it's not going to delete any student progress in their tests. So tests are not saved within the session. You can always delete and recreate a session as often as you need to, and the student's progress is retained. And we're actually going to go through a demo where I'll walk you through these steps too, so you get a chance to see it in action. But essentially, here's kind of the workflow. So starting along the left, you would go to Manage Test Sessions and click that button. And then over on the top right, you'll see those two options. You'll have that Test My Class button. And once you click it, it actually throws you right into your test session. So it starts it immediately. You'll be right there on that proctoring screen shown below, and you'll be able to start testing. So that's just kind of a preview. We'll go over all the details of that screen here in a moment and make sure that it all is clear. As far as the other ways of creating test sessions, besides using Test My Class, you can manually create your session under that Find Students to Test button. This will allow you to go in and use some filters and search features, so you can filter down to the school, grade, teacher, and even the specific class to identify your group of students. You can also search by their name or their ID. And it'll allow you to perform that search multiple times. So if you have students from different groups or different classes that you need to test at the same time, you can add those all into one session. Then you will also need to go in and create a test session name for that session. So the name needs to be unique, and please keep in mind the name is how the students are going to log into the session. So you want to keep it something simple. Don't use characters that are easily mistaken for other characters, especially when testing those lower grades, just to make it easy for them to log in. And then when you're creating manually, you'll also be able to assign those tests and accommodations before the session starts. So this is a good way of just getting everything prepared ahead of time. And also, if you're going to be creating test sessions for any other users, this is the process that you'd follow, and then get your session saved so that the people actually coming in and giving the test can locate the session and use it when they're ready to. Speaking of, we're going to next go over how to find your sessions here in a moment. But when you're creating manually, there's a couple of other steps. So essentially, once you've clicked that Find Students to Test button, then you're going to see the screen here on the left where you'll see the different search options. So you can use these 4 drop downs to choose how narrow of a search you'd like to do. So you don't necessarily have to go all the way down to the classroom level. If you know, for example, there's some 3rd grade students that you need to test, you can put the filter down to grade 3 and search. You will get a much broader range of results, so you'll need to look through that, but you can narrow the search down all the way down to the classroom level if you'd like. And as you're seeing here, once you click search at the bottom left, it will pop up and show you all the students that met that search criteria. So you can look through, you can either check that top check mark to check everyone and add all of the students to your session, or if you know there are some in there that you're not going to be testing, you can manually go in and just check which students that you're planning to test and click that Add Students button, and that'll add them to the session. So when you're manually creating the session through this process, once you add them to the session, then there's still a few more things that we highly recommend that you do. So essentially, once the students are added, you'll want to click on that Assign Test button and assign them the appropriate test that they're going to be taking. And if the student does have any special accommodation needs, you'll want to go in and make sure the accommodations are assigned as well. Essentially, if you create a session and you don't have a test assigned, the student still can log in, but then they'll actually have the ability to choose which test they're taking from their screen. As the proctor, you still always have control over whether or not you confirm the student into that test. So you do still have a final check to make sure they're getting into the right test. But just to prevent any misclicks, we always recommend proctors go in and assign those tests ahead of time. Following this workflow, if you're going in and creating the session manually, you can click on Test Now once you've assigned your tests and your accommodations and you're ready to go. And then that'll start the session immediately for you to use right then and there. Otherwise, if you know you're not going to use it at that moment and you want to save it for later, you can click that Save Session button, and then you'll have the opportunity to put a name in. So as I mentioned, the name needs to be unique, and students are going to type that in to log in. So we generally want it to be something pretty simple and pretty short. All right, then moving on to locating a saved test session. So let's say you either have already started testing a couple days ago and you're wanting to go in and resume your session, or someone else in your building or in your district has created sessions for you, and you just need to go in and find your session so that you can start testing your students. So here along the left, once again, you'll want to click on Manage Test Sessions there. And then we're going to ignore those first two blue buttons this time and click where it says Saved Testing Sessions. That'll expand this section of the screen and you'll be able to see test sessions that have been created. Just in general, I want to kind of restate that students retain progress for their test no matter which session they're in. So they can be added to different sessions, they can be moved between sessions, and they're as long as they log into the same test, subject, and grade level that they started before, they'll pick up right where they left off. So you can always use a new session. Another tip for the screen is once you're in the Save Testing Session screen, by default, if you see that Created By box, it's going to have your own name in the box. So it's only going to show sessions that you have created yourself. So if you're in that situation where somebody else is creating the sessions for you, you'll just want to click in that Created By box and delete your name out. And then you'll see where it says All Proctors. And then if you click on All Proctors, you'll actually see all the sessions that are available to you for your school. So that'll be a great way to go in and find those sessions that were created ahead of time by someone else. All right, next up, we want to move on to assigning tests. So as I mentioned, this is an important step just to prevent any errors and prevent students from logging into the wrong tests. First of all, I want to mention with this screenshot, the environment that we're in has access to a lot of demo and sample tests, so you're not going to see quite as many. You'll want to use the tests that we showed listed earlier in the slide deck, those main specific ones for math, for reading, and for language arts, and have the correct grade level. Essentially, once you go in and select a student, you want to click Assign Test, and you can choose the appropriate test for that student from this list and save. You're able to assign tests both as you're creating the session before it started, or even once you started the session and students are actively testing, you do still have access to go in and make these edits. So if a student walks into the room late and you need to add them to your session, you still can do that, assign the test, and do all of that without interrupting anyone else who's testing. And then something else worth mentioning is if you do have a group of students who are different grade levels or maybe testing in different subjects, you can assign different tests to different students. So it's very flexible in allowing you to assign what you need. All right, and I do see a question in the chat I want to address now because it's relevant here. So thank you, Julie. So Julie's asking, when creating a new session for a student to work on a test in a new setting, do accommodations need to be reassigned to each session? Or once they have been assigned to the student, will they transfer to other sessions? That's a great question, and that's a really good point. So accommodations are only applicable to that particular session that the student is in. So if you create a test session and you assign the accommodations there, then the student will have them for that session. But if you create a brand new test session and add that same student into that new session, it will retain the test progress, but it will not retain the accommodations. So please just make sure whether your student is starting from the beginning of the test or they're resuming on a subsequent day, that you check and that they do have the proper accommodations assigned. And then that takes us right into assigning accommodations. So a test does have to be assigned before it'll allow you to assign the accommodations, since those can change depending on which test they're taking. Proctors do have to assign the accommodation before a student logs in. We want to make sure the student has access to that accommodation from question 1 to give them the best experience. It will allow you to change it partway through. So you can add it in if a student logs in and they notice right on that first question, they're supposed to have text to speech and they don't. You can go in and correct it, but we definitely recommend everyone double check all of their accommodations ahead of time so students are getting the proper experience. And then just in general, any accommodations that are provided to students need to have a documented need, and the student needs to be provided those during their regular instruction. We generally don't want students to be using accommodations for a test that they're not used to using throughout the year. And then we'll touch on this a little more here in a moment, but we also want to mention that text-to-speech is allowed for the math test and language arts. But for reading, the reading passages cannot be read aloud for that reading test. So as you're seeing here in the screenshot on the right, when you do assign text-to-speech to a student, it does give you 4 options for which elements of the test are going to be read out loud. So per main DOE policy, reading passages cannot be read out loud to the student for the reading test. So you can check the first, third, and fourth boxes, but just make sure assets such as reading passages is not checked when you assign the accommodation. Speaking of, we're going right into accommodations and accessibility. So this was a slide that Nancy covered in our last training and also provided here. And I think there's a couple of questions coming up that this should hopefully answer. So actually, Nancy, I see you came off mute. Did you want to add anything? Sorry, I see you're back on mute. There we go.
Yes, instead of talking to myself. Sure, I'll just add, Alex just covered that for the math and language sessions, text-to-speech is allowed for all 4 of those components. But again, text-to-speech should be something that a student is receiving during regular instruction all the time and classroom and interim assessments. What we did last fall was disable the reading text-to-speech altogether, so nobody could check any of the boxes, which led to the requirement of a human reader for anyone who wanted that for the answer choices, question directions, and question prompts. That didn't work out as well as we thought, so this spring, text-to-speech will not be disabled or turned off by NWEA for the reading session. However, we are stressing that the reading passages are not allowed to be read aloud either by text-to-speech or by a human reader. So when we do our data analysis over the summer, when we get our results back from NWEA, if we analyze all the accommodations, if we see that any students have those boxes checked for text-to-speech or read aloud for assets such as reading passages, those assessments are going, the sessions are going to be invalidated. Okay.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yep.
Yeah, so just as Nancy said, just make sure that you have those boxes checked appropriately and that reading passages is unchecked. And then on to the next one. I think this is one that Nancy just alluded to for read aloud.
Yes, so a read aloud kind of goes hand in hand with text to speech, whatever the student receives regularly in classroom instruction. So the same applies, that a human reader can read the answer choices, questions and directions, questions prompts, and those 3 boxes can be checked if this is what the student is receiving all the time. And please do not check the assets such as reading passages. Again, when we do our analysis, if we see those boxes are checked, the session will be invalidated.
Thanks. All right. And then I do just want to mention for the read aloud accommodation, that's obviously something provided in person to the student, not by the system. So when you go in and make these checks, you're really letting us know what was provided to the student. All right, and then there's one other question I think we'll address quickly since it's relevant here. So Justin's asking, if a student has an accommodation but chooses not to use it, should we change the assets?
No, you don't need to change well, that depends on what you mean by the word asset. I think out of those 4 components in the reading session, the only one that includes the word asset is the reading passages. So that shouldn't be clicked no matter what. But if a student usually has read aloud for those other components, the answer choices, and you check those boxes, and the student decides that they do not want to use the text to speech or read aloud, you don't need to correct it. That's a student's choice.
Great. All right. Thanks, Nancy. So we'll move on to proctoring. So here we go. So proctoring is going to be the big bulk of today's presentation and what we want to make sure everyone has a good understanding of by the time they leave. So essentially it comes down to 3 things. So creating or locating your test session. So answering the question, who am I testing now? Then having the students log in. So they'll be logging in from their devices and they choose their name from the dropdown once they log in with that session name and password. And then it's the proctor's job to go in and supervise the test process. They'll be able to see how far students are along in the test, what question they're on, which tests and accommodations they have assigned, and then can continue along that process. They've also got a few actions they can take. So as I mentioned before, when students first log in, it's the proctor that confirms them into the test and make sure that they can start. That's a great way for proctors to make sure they've logged in with their correct name, they are assigned the proper subject and grade level and have proper accommodations before they begin. All right, so there are some great benefits to the way proctoring is done in Math Growth. So as I mentioned before, it's very flexible. You can have students from multiple grade levels and multiple subjects in your session. So if a student ends up in your room and they quickly need to sit down and take the test, you can go in and add them to your session. You can save your sessions to resume at a later time. And just in general, going along with this, the student's progress is saved after every question they answer. So even if their machine shuts off, they lose internet connection, something like that happens and they get kicked out of the test, it'll actually still have all of their progress backed up from the last question they answered, even without the proctor having to do anything. And then it is also secure. It does require students to log in with the session name and session info that's provided by the proctor. And then the proctor does have to go through that act of confirming them in order for them to actually start the test. So we do want to talk about some of the actions that are available for proctors to take. So as I mentioned before, there is confirm that'll let students write into the test once their proctors confirm they're in the right place. But then we've got these other 3 which can come up during different situations, really just the 2. The third one we don't want to use very often, if at all. So essentially we've got pause as an option, so that as it sounds, it'll let the proctors go in and pause a student's test. This is really useful for if a student just needs a short break, if they're stepping out to use the restroom, if they just need a short break. This will remove the test from their computer screen so nobody else can interact with it. And then it'll allow the student to resume from that same device once the proctor resumes them and they're back in the room and they're not required to log back in. This is meant to be for up to 25 minutes. If it's longer than 25 minutes, then their test automatically gets suspended so that their progress is saved and they can resume at a later time. That goes right into the next one. So the next action is suspend. So proctors can choose to suspend a student's test. What that does is it'll essentially save all their progress up to that point and log the student's device out. So then that way they can resume at a later day. They could resume the same day if they need to. They can always log right back in, but the difference between pause and suspend is suspend logs them out and takes them back to that first login screen, while pause just kind of puts a pause screen up and lets them resume from where they were. Another good thing for suspend is we're going to talk about this too, but if students do have any technical issues, if their device shuts off or they lose internet, then being able to suspend and log them out of the system and have them log in fresh is a great way to reconnect and have them resume right where they left off. Another thing to mention is suspended tests will stay suspended for up to 28 days. After that point, then they do automatically terminate. So essentially, if it's been that much time or longer, then the student would have already gotten more instructional time. And at this point, we'd recommend that they just start the test from the beginning since so much time has passed. And then the final option here, it is kind of the scary one. It is the option to terminate a test. So what this does is it does erase all of the students' progress in that test and start them over. You really only want to use this if the student started taking the wrong test. So maybe the wrong grade level, the wrong subject, or a test they weren't supposed to have taken at all. Then you can go in and terminate it. It'll erase their progress. You can assign them the correct test, and then you can allow them back in and allow them to resume. All right, so just to kind of recap, some best practices here would be to create sessions ahead of time, assign the tests, and assign any accommodations before students log in. That'll make sure you're in control, students are taking the tests they need to take, and have the proper accommodations. We also just recommend that you only proctor students who are physically in your classroom while testing. We know there may still be some districts or schools that are remote due to COVID and everything. So in that case, it still will allow you to test remotely. But in general, if you're in the physical school building, we just recommend that you only proctor students who are there with you. That way, you're monitoring that they've logged in and chosen their correct name and all of those things. And then, as I mentioned, use caution if choosing that option to terminate a test, since it does erase the student's progress and it cannot be undone. All right, so then what does the test look like for students? What does the student side of things look like? So as you'll see here on the right, this is essentially just a sample item of what students will see. So depending on the test, they might have a reading passage on the left and some answer options on the right. If you see along the top, there are different tools and item aids available to all students. We'll go over those here in a moment too. They have the option to reset and refresh the screen. So if their machine gets frozen or if something isn't loading properly, they can always do a refresh. And then at any moment, they can sign out of the test and log out if they need to. So moving on, we'll talk about the different tools that are available. So these aren't really accommodations. These are available for all students to use at any time during the test. So we have things like the highlighter and eraser, allows them to highlight any text or phrases, can be really helpful for those reading passages if they're a bit long and students want to focus on a particular part of the passage. And then hand in hand with that is the eraser. So you can go in and erase anything that's been highlighted you don't need. Color display, so there are options to change the on-screen background or font color. And generally, this is going to be accessed through the device's color settings. So if you need instructions on how to do that, if you go to our help section and just look up color display or color contrast, you'll find those instructions for your device. Then, as we've been talking about text to speech, looks like there's a typo there, but text to speech, that would actually read the questions aloud to the student. And as we've talked about, you can choose which of the 4 options are read, but for the reading test, we want to make sure that passages is unchecked and not read aloud to the student. Then there's also answer eliminator. So this is helpful if students are trying to do that process of elimination. They can pick which answers they know are not correct and then be left with the one they haven't eliminated. All right, got muted for a moment. All right, and then in addition, there's also magnification. So if students need to zoom in, that's available at all times from the top left. They can zoom in to up to 300% and zoom back out. Then also keyboard navigation. Every part of the student testing experience can be navigated with the keyboard. So using the arrows, the spacebar key. So that's available for students who prefer to use a keyboard over a mouse. And then finally, depending on the test and on the particular question, there are different tools that will appear. So for example, certain math items will have a calculator that appears and also might have like a ruler or a protractor for those measuring questions. All right, while we're here on accommodations, I do see another question that might be one for Nancy. Are students allowed to use classroom tools such as multiplication charts and hundreds charts for the math test session now?
No, only the tools that are embedded in the platform are allowed.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Yep, so you'll just want to make sure students use what's available in the system. So like for math items, there are some where a calculator is permitted, but other than that, you don't want to provide any additional support to students. All right, something else that can be really handy on student devices is our workstation diagnostic check. So on a student device, you can go to check.nwea.org prior to testing, and it'll run a few checks. It'll make sure their operating system version is a supported version. It'll check a few things like bandwidth, the allow list, so making sure the URLs that the system needs to access are not being blocked. And then if there are any issues, it'll actually show a red X next to any portions that failed the test so that you know what you need to do to fix those. And then once again, if you need any help with that, you can always reach out to our help desk. All right, and then another great resource for students is the practice test. So once again, this is something you can have students do prior to testing, gives them a great chance to use a lot of those item tools we just covered. So they can practice with the highlighter, notepad, all of those available tools and make sure they understand how to do that. It'll also give them a chance to use things like, answer the drag and drop items and see how the different items function so that they understand how to interact with it. In addition, for students who are testing using the web browser and not the secure browser, once again, we recommend everyone use the secure browser anytime that's possible, but we know for some students testing remotely, that's not really an option. So they can go to this no pop-up URL, which makes it a little easier since there aren't any pop-up windows and everything can be done from the one screen. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing this and go ahead and go through the process that we've been talking about. Give everyone a chance to see it in action and see what it all looks like. So just a moment here while I change my screen share. All right, so here I'm at the Map Growth login screen. So we'll go ahead and sign in with my account that I have set up in our sample environment. So this should be familiar to anyone who's been using Map Growth already. So once you log in, today's focus is we want to go along the left and go to manage test sessions. This is where you're always going to go to be able to give the test. Then as we talked about before, there's a couple of different ways to go in and create a session. So you can use find students to test if you want to do some searches and find which students to add, or you can just click test my class to have the students in your class be added to a session. Let's do find students to test real quick here. So here you'll have these different drop-down options to filter and narrow your search down to which students that you're planning to test. So in this case, I'll go through here and choose the school we've got some sample data in, Three Sisters Elementary. In this case, I know my students are grade 3. I'm set up as the instructor and the class is called homeroom. So you can choose how narrow you want your search to be. I'm going to search down right to the particular class and click on search. And then here are my students. And you'll notice that it shows around 10 to a page. So if you have multiple pages, you can click this arrow here to tab through the pages and just confirm everyone is listed here that you need. In this case, I'm going to add everyone to the session. So I'll click on add students. Then scrolling down here, we'll see all of the students that have been added to my session so far. Let's say in this case, we know they're third graders, and let's say we're going to do the math test. So we'll click on the first of all, the checkbox to check everyone off. Click on assign test. I do want to mention this list is going to show a lot more tests than what you'll see. But in this case, for our demo today, we're going to choose demo math 2 through 5. You'll want to make sure to do growth math 2 through 5 main version. And I'll click on assign. And then you can see in this column here, it does show which test is assigned. So this is a great way to confirm which one's already been assigned to students on the right. And then let's say we do have a student who has a text-to-speech accommodation that's already in their IEP and approved. We'll go in and select the student and click assign accommodations. And there are a lot of different accommodation options to choose from. So you do want to go in and mark whatever has been provided to the student. But in this case, we're going to go into text-to-speech. And in this case, since this is going to be math, we're going to be able to choose all of the options since it is math and not reading. And then click on assign. And then you can see right here, the accommodation shows yes, that one has been assigned. And if you highlight your mouse over the student's name, you actually will see more detail about the accommodation and which options have been chosen. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this session to be used later. Let's do Alex Math 2, save and exit. All right. So in this case, I saved the session. Now we're back at the Manage Test Session screen. And if you click on saved testing sessions, this is where you can see sessions that have been saved and aren't in use right now. And then, like I mentioned before, it's only going to show sessions I've created at first. But if I delete my name out of this box and give it a moment, you can click all proctors, and then it'll show you all of the sessions that have been created. So in this case for today, let's go into that Math 2 session and click on Test Now. All right, and then here is the screen you'll see when you're actually proctoring a session and the session is active. So this is where proctors are going to be spending most of their time. So I do want to take a moment to just kind of go over all of the elements of this page and explain what we're looking at here. So starting here along the top left, you're going to see the session name and the password. So these two pieces of info is going to be what students use to log in and actually access the test. You'll be able to see the proctor pin on the right, which we'll touch upon a little bit later, but that's something that gives proctors control. If you need to report an issue with a question, if the student's test is paused, you can resume it using that proctor pin from their machine. There's a few different ways to do it. You can also click this to hide the proctor pin. So if your screen is visible to students, it's recommended to hide that. We also just recommend that you not make the screen visible to students, since it will show everyone else's progress and they don't need to see and feel anxious about how far along other students are. So then moving down here, we also do have the names of all the students in your session. You can see in this test assignment column, that's a great way to confirm which tests that they already have assigned and which one they're logging into. And then as mentioned before, you'll be able to see if a student has an accommodation, and you can hover over the student's name to see what the accommodation is and confirm that before logging them in. We've also got a few of these buttons here that we want to cover. So this first one, select status, essentially what it does is it's kind of a shortcut to making these check marks for you. So you can choose which status that you'd like to check in. The status column here is also going to be really key for seeing where along the testing process students are. So in this case, they're all in a waiting student. They're all ready to be logged in. If you were to click select status, you can choose a waiting student, and that just checks off all the students in that status. So this is essentially kind of a shortcut so you can check off students who are all in the same status without having to manually click. I'll check one of them so we can take a quick look at this column. So select action. This is where you can do things such as pausing a student's test, confirm them into the test. You can suspend, do all of those different functions here to affect a student's test. Then these ones we already covered. You can assign a test or assign accommodations. So if there's a student who doesn't have either of those applied yet, you can go in and correct those. If you need to, you can always add another student into your session. So you can perform a search, quickly add them in, and then get them ready to test. And then if you need to, it does actually allow you to create a student from this screen. We recommend going through the regular rostering process to create a student, just to prevent missing attributes or any incorrect information. But if you need to create someone on the spot, you can right here. And then you can always go in and remove if there's a student who is in your session and won't be testing. Honestly, there's no harm in a student being in your session who never shows up and logs in. So you can leave them there, but if you'd like to tidy up your list, you can remove them as well. So I think that covers everything on the proctor side. What we're gonna do now, oh, Nancy, so you have a question?
Alex, I have a question on the right-hand column about rapid guessing. We've talked about the rapid guessing, and that is something that I'm going to talk about for policy as to what qualifies for a re-administration or a retest of a session. And I know that the sloth pops up on the student screen, the slow down sloth. Can you talk about that column and what happens there?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Yeah, I can definitely cover that. So that's a good point. So essentially, as students are proceeding through the test, if students are clicking through very quickly and answering questions within usually just a couple of seconds, then it's going to flag those as rapid guesses. And if the student continues just clicking through, answering next, and not leaving enough time to actually be able to read the question, and we can tell that they're just going through within 1 to 2 seconds, and they keep doing that, you'll see this column on the far right, rapid guesses, start to increase. And after they do several rapid guesses in succession, the system will actually pause their test automatically. And then that's where you'll see this alert here. So right now there's nothing to alert us to, but you'll see this little check mark turn to red to grab your attention. if there is a student who has rapid guessed and has been paused. So you can actually use this button here to see which student has been paused. We recommend that you go have a chance to speak with the student, let them know, it's not a timed test, they can take their time. Also make sure they understand that it's an adaptive test. So as they're doing really well, it will keep getting harder until it gets to a point where it presents content that they don't know yet and that they haven't learned yet, at which point they are expected to get it wrong. So map growth, for a successful test, students are going to get around 50% right and 50% wrong. So some students might not quite understand that and maybe get discouraged. So that's a great opportunity for you to have a chance to let them know to slow down, take their time, and then unpause the test, and then they'll be able to resume. Let's see, I do see another question really quick. So if a student is listed in a session, yet the child will be testing in a different setting, can they be added to another session simultaneously? So they can. So if a student was meant to be in your group, but then they got moved to a different group, you don't have to remove them. They can be added to the other session at the same time. It just will not let them log into both at the same time. So you don't have to worry about taking them out of your session. All right. So at this point, we're going to move on to the student side of things and then have a chance for you to see what it looks like for both to go at once. So I'm going to go to the student screen. So this would be the student's device. They're opening that secure browser or the app and logging in. Here's where they're going to put in the session name and password. So put in the session name. I saw the password was 3740 and continue. All right, so then now they're in the session, and then this is where they need to go in and select their name from the list. In this case, we're going to choose Juliet. So there we go. That's the student we are. And as you'll see from the student side, since the test was already chosen, they're not able to go in and make that selection. It's already there. So once they've picked their name, they'll click this continue button. It'll give them a final chance to confirm, is this you? Is this the test that you're supposed to be taking? And then school, grade, and birth year, just for students who might have similar names to help identify this as the right kid. And then next. And then at this point, the proctor needs to confirm them. So going back to the proctor screen, what you can do here to keep in mind is this page is going to refresh every 60 seconds, but you can click this refresh button just to refresh it yourself. And you'll see the student status has changed. So they are now in the to be confirmed status. So there's two ways to confirm. If you click this blue button, it'll confirm everyone who's in that status. Generally, there's not a problem with doing that. But if you want to just confirm one student at a time, if you're going around the room, you've confirmed Juliet, shows her name, you can select action and choose confirm. That'll show the status as confirmed. So then back on the student side, it may take a moment to load, but there we go. You're confirmed to start the test. The student can click the next arrow, and then they'll be presented with the first question. All right, and then back on this side, if we refresh, it now shows the status as testing. So just keep an eye on this testing, the status column. That's how you can tell where students are in the test. In this case, we're just going to go through a couple of questions here really quick. I'm not going to, this is not what we want students to do because I'm not doing my best. I'm just clicking through. All right, and then back on this side, if we refresh the page, you'll see that the question number has increased. And you also might notice some of the rapid guessing has increased since I've gone very quickly. But at this point, let's say the student does need to take a break, needs to step away and use the restroom. So you can check off the student's name and then select action is always what you want to choose to take an action on a student's test. We'll do a pause. You'll see the status now shows as paused. And when we go back to the student side, it shows their test is paused. So they can't confirm, they can't do anything until the proctor allows them back in. So it's been a few minutes, they've come back to the room, they're ready to resume. Then as the proctor, you can select the same student, select action and resume. And then that'll change their status back to testing. Back on the student screen, it may take a moment to load, but then it'll show that they are able to continue. They can click this blue arrow and get right back into where they were. We do want to touch upon a couple of other actions you can take on the test. So pause is going to be the most common one if students step away. But if there are other issues where, let's say, actually, I'll go through the steps now. Let's say the student's machine just fully shuts off. They're on a laptop and the battery dies and they're no longer able to get into the test. So in this case, I'm just going to close the window. the device shut itself right off. The student's no longer in the test. If you refresh the page, honestly, the proctor side is not always going to notice that that's happened. The student will still show up as testing. You might notice as you're walking around the room, their device is off. Maybe they're trying to log back in and they're not able to get in. In this case, if you're able to get the student a new device with a charged battery, when they try to sign back in, and I'll go through it here, they might notice, all right, session name, 740. All right, so if the student just fixed the issue on their own, tried to log right back in without really notifying the proctor, they might notice that their name is no longer appearing in the list. So we were Juliet, and her name is no longer there. The main way to identify this is the student needs to be in this awaiting student status in order for their name to appear on that login screen. So to get them back to that status, what you want to do as the proctor, and this can apply for any situation where a student gets kicked out and they're trying to sign back in and they can't. You want to do select action suspend. So if you remember, that one logs the student's device out completely. So hit OK. They'll be put into this suspended status. And then to set them up to be able to log in again, you select the same student and you select action test again. So I do want to stress test again. All it really does is it puts the student back into this awaiting status so that they can log back in and take their test. I know it might sound like it's having them start over, but it does not. Test again won't have them lose any progress or make them start from the beginning. They'll be able to log back in where they left off. So back on the student side, we'll want them to refresh the screen. But then after it reloads, you should see there's her name again, Juliet. Test is already still set. Continue on. Yep, that's who we need. We'll continue. Give it a moment here, and then the proctor needs to confirm. We'll refresh. In this case, we already know that's Juliet. We'll just use this confirm all button. And you will get a pop-up if a student's resuming a suspended test. So it just wants to confirm this test is already in progress. Would you like them to resume? We'll leave it on resume and hit done. Now they're confirmed. And then back on the student side, once it loads here, they're confirmed. And they're back here on question number 5, where they left off. So really, that's kind of what it comes down to for proctoring. So keep an eye on the status column, seeing if any students are needing to be confirmed, keeping an eye on the room, seeing if anyone got kicked out, they might need to be suspended, and then choose test again to let them log back in. And then you can always see their question number here and see how far along students are. When you're nearing the end of your session, the end of your day, if students haven't all completed, that's okay. You can click on this blue end session button at the top right to end the session. And then you'll get a confirmation if you want to end the session. So you can click on yes. So just to kind of reiterate, ending the session, if any students are in progress, it'll automatically suspend their test. So you don't need to take that action. It'll suspend automatically. Any progress will automatically be saved. So you don't have to worry if you just close the window as the proctor. If you don't end the session, then it's not going to have any adverse effects. Students' progress is still saved and the sessions automatically close themselves overnight. So we'll end the session. This will also give you a chance to rename the session if you'd like to save and exit. Or if you finish testing everyone in the session and you don't need the session anymore, you can delete the session. Once again, all the progress remains, but that session will be gone. So you can put the students in a different session if you need to. In this case, we'll save and exit. There we go. And then that kind of covers everything for proctoring. So I'm going to change the screen share back to the slide deck. If there are any questions about that process or about proctoring, feel free to put them in the chat. And then we'll see if we have a moment to answer those now. And then we also have some time at the end. All right. Okay, so moving back on here. So yeah, student experience we went through just now. All right, here are the best practices that we covered earlier. All right, so we went through some of these already, but I just want to give a few scenarios. So if a student is leaving the room for only about 10 minutes, what action do you need to go in and select for them? So the action you would choose is to pause. So pause a student for breaks less than 25 minutes. the proctor can go in and choose resume when the student's back, and they won't need to log in again. They'll be able to resume right from where they left off. Then another scenario, so a student's device loses internet connection and they can't continue through the test anymore. What would you do as the proctor? So the proctor can suspend the student's test to log them out of the system. In this case, the student would need to reconnect to Wi-Fi and make sure their internet's back up and running. And then when they open the secure testing browser or app, they'll be able to log back in and resume. In this case, you also want to make sure as the proctor that the student is in that awaiting student status, because that's the only time their name will show up on that sign-in screen. Then here, so testing time's over, but the students did not complete the test. What would you do? So you can go in and suspend all the students' tests, or if you just end the testing session as you saw, it's going to automatically suspend all the students that are in progress, and then it'll allow you to save the session to use later, or you can delete the session if you don't think you'll need it. I do see another question coming in from Amanda. So does testing have to take place in the app only, or can this be done straight from the website? So I do want to answer, and then I'll see if Nancy has anything to add. But essentially, we always want to recommend students use the app. That is the most secure experience. That makes sure that they're not able to go to other websites while they're testing. The app will lock down on the screen so they can't navigate away from the test. So anytime you can, please use the app. We know there are some instances where students are testing remote or homeschool or things like that, where they may not have access to the app. So in those cases, you can use the website, but please keep in mind, it's not going to be locked down like the app is. Is there anything else you want to add, Nancy?
No, you covered it perfectly, Alex. Thanks.
Sounds good. Great. All right. All right. And I do see Tara answering the question too in the chat. So another thing just to mention is that students do need to have all of their student state ID numbers assigned if they're homeschool students. All right.
Oh, yeah, I know that kind of went into a private chat for a second, but I'll address it. Someone was asking about enrolling homeschool students, that they want to separate their data from their actual students within the school from homeschool students. I'm only speaking on the policy of assessing homeschool students. It's a district decision that's worked out by a parent requesting that their homeschool student be assessed in the district. I don't know of any districts that have ever said no, but the student must be enrolled in our state synergy enrollment system and must have a 9-digit ID. There is some information that we covered in the last one with the district assessment coordinators and the technology coordinators about the upload from NEO and the columns that have the SSID and the state ID are two different columns, and we found that some in the NWEA platform, people are putting other numbers than their given 9-digit MEDMS numbers. So they must have their 9-digit MEDMS number in there. Otherwise, whoever is doing your enrollment upload is going to get an error message anyway. So, and that is to give the homeschool students a report, whether it's through the NWEA platform or later on when our results come out in our Focal Point Mars platform. They must have the 9 digits. But I'm not going to speak. Maybe Alex, you can address how to separate that so that homeschool student population data is not being factored into the school population. Someone mentioned something about creating a different school or class or.
Yeah. So I'll briefly cover that. So essentially, if you did need that data separated out, then you could create a homeschool school building and have the students assigned there. And then you would still test them the same way, but their results would be on a separate school. Or you can create like a special program and assign those homeschool students to the program. That way you can filter out results by program or just view results for that program. So I would say, if you just search our help section for special programs, that give you good instructions on how to do that, or just reach out and call our help desk. I'll just answer this verbally really quick. So someone was asking, can the no pop-up browser be utilized for testing? Yes, it does work. I would just say really only in those approved instances where students are not able to use a secure browser or app, and asking what are the approved instances really just for testing homeschool students, unless Nancy has anything else to add.
Well, if students are quarantined, and that would be throughout the 6 weeks of the NWEA window. If a student is unable to come to school but can be tested at home, that's an instance that would be approved. Schools and districts who have any students who are placed in out-of-state schools are responsible for remotely administering the NWEA to eligible students in other states. So that's another reason that it would be approved. Otherwise, the lockdown browser is what we are recommending.
Great, thanks. Okay. All right. And then we've got just a few more things about troubleshooting, which we did cover, but want to give everyone a chance in case any issues pop up during testing, so you're ready and know what to do. So in this case, if a question fails to display on a student's screen, maybe they're just getting a white screen or it's only partially loaded, then there's always a way to refresh. So on PC, you can press F5. On Chromebook, there is that refresh button on the keyboard. And on Mac, you can press Command R. There's also that refresh button built into the screen. So if the screen's loaded enough where they can click refresh, have them do that. Otherwise, if they're still not getting it to load, you can have them paused and resumed. And then you can have them suspended, have them fully log out and test again. And between those combinations, that should get things loaded again for the student. Next up is if a student is kicked out. So partway through the test, they get disconnected, maybe they turn off the machine or they close the app somehow, then the status usually still shows them as testing. So that's when you need to select the student and suspend them, then select them once again and choose test again. Have the student open up the app one more time and sign back in, and then they'll be able to resume right where they left off. Then here's another one where the student's trying to log in, but they can't find their name in the drop-down menu. So once again, the student must be into that awaiting student status for their name to appear. You also want to just double check that they actually have been added to the test session. If not, you can always add them into your session. And then once you've made those corrections and they're in the proper awaiting student status, you can have them refresh their device and they'll be able to choose their name and get confirmed in as normal. Okay, so that really covers the bulk of proctoring, what you'd need to do as a proctor, all of the actions you can take, how to get students back in if they get kicked out. And we want to cover some operational reports, ways that you can track testing progress throughout your school or district and make sure all the students who need to test have a proper test, as well as checking on a few other things, making sure they're not missing any information on their profile that's required and things like that. So essentially, I think I said most of this just now, but you'll be able to use operational reports to track progress throughout the window. You can see if there's students who are missing some rostering information that you can go in and fill those gaps. And there's also a good way to export all of the students who have been rostered so you can make sure that there's nobody missing. This is a great one to compare against that NEO file and make sure that all the students that you're expected to test from the NEO file are in fact in the system. So the first one we've got here is the students without valid test results report. So this will help give you a list of students who have either not started testing, who have started but haven't completed yet. So if they were suspended, paused, or even terminated, or who have completed tests, but the tests were deemed invalid. So that's pretty rare, but there may be cases if a student tested in only 3 minutes and they rushed through the whole test, or things like that might deem their tests invalid. Please keep in mind that this particular report, it will only have results from the previous day. So any testing done that day is not going to be available in this report, but there is another way you can confirm same day testing, which we'll show in a moment. And then as you're generating this report, you can go in and choose specific grades and specific tests if you're wanting to drill down and just confirm, for example, if all your third graders have taken the math test, you can go in and run this report. Then the next one we've got is students without reporting attributes. So this would mean some of their information did not get imported via the roster, or they're missing pieces of info that they would need to have added. If you were present for last week's pre-administration training, then you know that you want to import that NEO roster But if you imported the NEO roster on its own, you will still need to import another roster with your class information. So this could be a good way for you to identify if students have those classes missing. Essentially, anyone who appears on the screen means they had enough information to get their profile created and even take a test, but they're still missing some information to fully be reportable. This is a great way to troubleshoot if there's data missing on reports. If you know your class tested, but there's one kid missing from the results, this can help you see maybe they're missing some information on their profile. It'll help identify which profiles need to be updated. And then it's another good way to check which students are going to be provided on their reports back to main DOE at the end of the window. Then this next one is the students by district CSV export. So essentially this one is just going to export a list of all student records in a CSV format, including all their demographic info, so you can confirm that they have been rostered into the system. As I mentioned before, this is a great one to compare against the NEO roster and just make sure all of the students that you're expected to test are in fact in the system. And then you can use this in conjunction with that students without valid test results to confirm that all the students who you need to test are in the system and that they have valid tests. And then there is one more here. It's actually accessed from a different page, but it still falls under that kind of operational reports. So this is the test history search. So this one's available to users who are proctors. And this one's going to be back under manage test sessions along the left. And then instead of creating a session, there's a tab along the right that says test history search. So once again, you can use these filters and drop-down menus to narrow down to which group you're checking. You can have it check students who are not yet tested, who have a suspended test or both. And then as Nancy mentioned before, you can also use it to identify students who have reached that rapid guessing threshold and who have answered 30% or more questions rapid guessed. We know if they've guessed at 30% or higher, their score is not going to be as reliable. So this might be a good opportunity for requesting a retest. And then this screen also does have results same day. So you don't have to wait overnight. You could run this at the end of your day and just confirm who has not finished testing. And then you can also use this to easily, all the students who show up in your results as not yet tested, you can add them to a session and create a makeup session so that they could all be tested together. All right, we do also want to briefly touch upon student score reports. I know the focus of today's training is really on proctoring and administering the test, so we don't have a lot of time to cover the score reports, but there are a lot of great resources available. So you can understand the RIT score, percentile ranking, understand the types of data that you're being provided, and make sure that you're able to go in and make some good decisions. So some of the most common reports that we see used are the student profile report. That's the one you're seeing here on the right. So you'll be able to see the student scores for that term in all the subjects they've taken, as well as their growth over time for as long as they've been using MAP growth, and things like growth projections and goals you can set for the next term and the next year. We've also got the class profile report, which is very similar to student profile, but available for your whole class. So you can kind of at a glance see where your class is. We've got the district summary report, which can be really handy to see how schools are performing against each other and how your district is performing. And then there's also the learning continuum. So learning continuum is really handy because it can help identify which skills students are ready to learn next based on how they performed in their MAP growth test. So there is the help section at the top right corner. If you click on that, there are actually video tutorials where somebody will walk you through all of the elements of the report and understanding all of the data points and what kind of decisions you can make using that data. We've got some of those links available here. So we've got the MAP growth report summary, which is actually what it's showing on the right. This is kind of a good direction on if you're looking for this type of data, which report is it that you need. We've also got our reports overview page, which gives you similar info. So if you're looking for, class level data based on growth, then you follow this table and it'll show you which of those reports will get you that information. Then we've got some more details on student profile reports, so how to view and understand the one that was on the last screen, same as class profile, and then also details for understanding that district summary report. All right, then we want to just add a couple of points for Maine. So if you want to cover these, Nancy, we added a couple of those slides in.
Oh, thanks, Alex.
Sure.
Alex was just talking about the rapid guessing, and we have a couple of reasons that would warrant a retest, not every time, but if a student is rapid guessing where they're over the 30% threshold, that sloth has popped up. The duration is less than 15 minutes for a session, that qualifies for a retest. If a student's RIT score is 10 points or more lower than the previous administration, that qualifies for a retest. If you gave a session to a student who was supposed to have an accommodation that they didn't receive, that would qualify for a retest. If a student took an assessment with an accommodation that they weren't supposed to have, that would qualify, or if you gave the wrong session at the wrong grade level. Our policy has not changed on this, and we still have the Qualtrics survey in place that each time that, whether you have to get permission at your school, at your district to administer a retest or not, we're asking that anyone that does so to fill out the Qualtrics survey, just so we have a data point records of how many retests are given. I do want to point out, when we analyzed the data from a year ago, spring 21 and the fall of 21, the number of retests were concerning to us in that if you give a wrong accommodation or forget an accommodation, you correct it and you give one retest. But when it comes to the RIT score variance or the rapid guessing, which may happen more than once, we are advising that no student should have to take the session more than twice. So one retest is allowed. We did find in our data analysis that there were some kids who were taking, the math session 5-6 times, and that's just that's not necessary. So thanks. And I should have one more. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I think those are the things that
I think this covers everything that you just spoke to, Nancy. So yeah, just as Nancy was saying, generally students would only take the test once, except for those extenuating circumstances. And just as Nancy was saying, retesting a student without a valid reason really doesn't provide them a great experience, and it does not really result in a better score. With the way that the tests are adaptive, students are seeing different questions and different items every time. So they're probably going to be seeing all different questions every time that they retest. So it's not really in their best interest, and it's not really going to give them a better score for them to do that. Otherwise, I think this covers everything Nancy already said. And then there's another link to that re-administration policy at the bottom.
Thank you for putting that on the slide. And
I think there was one last one for you, Nancy.
Yes, I just want to wrap back around to the text to speech. I'll say it again, the only difference from our text to speech policy from last fall to now is we are not disabling or turning off the text to speech in the reading session, but in the platform. The text to speech and read aloud feature is still not allowed for the reading passages. That was the policy last spring. It was the policy in the fall, and the same again this spring. That has been the policy from our previous math and ELA assessments as well. Having made that one tweak of us not turning off TTS to the reading session has a trickle effect of several of the documents that I post on the DOE website under that blue expandable accordion banner called Accessibility and Accommodations. That change affects the NWEA accessibility guide that comes out of the DOE. The read aloud protocol guide is now a bit different because we were relying on human readers doing a read aloud for all the things when we disabled the text to speech in the fall, and now that's got to be updated. I do have an accessibility crosswalk that shows features that you can see in the NWEA MARC platform versus our policy and rules for the DOE, because when you look in the MARC platform, you will see text to speech twice. It's listed as a designated support. It's also listed as an accommodation. There are some other things in there. Native language translation is an option for you to click those boxes in the NWEA MARC platform. That also has never been allowed on state assessments in Maine, and it's not going to go away because this is NWEA's platform, but those boxes should not be tested. So I have to tweak the crosswalk as well. So I am diligently working on posting those documents, and I will get them to you as soon as possible. When they're posted, I will send a listserv blast to that effect. So sorry about the delay on those.
All right, thanks, Nancy. And I see one more question from Lori. Will there be a security training video for proctors?
No, the test security agreement form that is on our assessment test security pages needs to be signed. And it just requires that you participate in any trainings like this one or the one that we had last week, or watch the videos and review all the appropriate materials that are posted and the accessibility guides. And as I believe I said earlier, we're asking that the test security agreement form be signed again this spring, even though it was signed last fall.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Nancy. All right. And I think with that, we are nearing the end. So we do want to make sure everyone has the NWEA partner support number for Maine. So this is a Maine specific phone number where our reps here are trained in the program we just talked about, and they're available to help 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern time. So that number is 855-430-1777. All right, and I know we've answered a lot of them along the way, but we just want to,
You know what, I'm sorry, now that I'm looking at the chat to see if other questions pop up. Sorry, let me go back to test security for a second. If you navigate to the assessment security page on the DOE assessment website, there are 3 little assessment security webisodes. They're 3 to 5 minutes each, and those would be helpful in addition to taking a look at our assessment security manual. Thanks.
Great. And actually, I think I was able to pull that up really quick, so I will just show that since it's right on the screen. So yeah, so here is the map growth section.
Yeah, that's the NWEA page. So
yes. And then the assessment security link along the left. And then here are the 3 webisodes.
There they are. Thank you.
Perfect. Sure. All right. There we go. All right. So yeah, so at this point, we are done with the bulk of the presentation and just want to open it up for any additional Q&A. So feel free to put any additional questions in the chat if there's anything else you can think of. You can also come off of mute if you'd like to just ask your question. Otherwise, we may have answered them. We also do always put an FAQ together for any questions that came up that weren't part of the slide deck, so we can provide that as well. So you have both the, well, all 3. You'll have the recording, the slide deck, and then that Q&A document. All right, I do see one for Nancy. So Jennifer's asking, Nancy, does the form cover both Maine Science and also NWEA, or do we need separate forms?
The assessment security form, I assume you're asking about it. We used to have them separate, but it's all consolidated into one now. There's check boxes at the top that say I'm signing this because I'm administering this assessment, and it includes our alternate assessments and our WEA access for Ls as well.
Thank you.
I see Sandy's asking, could you put the link to the slide deck in the chat again?
The slide deck is not posted yet. Yeah, so yeah, the recording is still going on. When that gets cleaned up and it gets transferred into YouTube, that will be posted. When we're done cleaning this up, NWEA will send me the full slide deck. I'll convert that to a PDF and post that. And then the answers to the questions that are in the chat may take a little bit longer because we're all working together to formulate the correct answers. So.
Great.